Professor Nick Grossman standing by, and I want to thank my friend Andrea for an Illini swag bag. Graduation's coming up.
Yes.
And unlike a lot of schools, they're actually having theirs, which is cool.
Yep, Saturday.
And thank you for the swag bag. And thank you to Professor Grossman for joining us once again. I know you were impressed with my saxophone playing, but we don't need to talk about that right now, if you don't mind.
All right, I can let that one go.
Professor, look, the very serious topic of the day, we talked to Brad Garrett from ABC News about a negotiated settlement of this war at some point and how difficult it'll be to even come to that. Let's take a step back even further from that. How do we get to a ceasefire?
Well, the fundamental problem is the same that it has always been, which is that Hamas wants to be in power in Gaza and is willing to sacrifice Palestinian civilians to get it. If anything, more Palestinian bodies piling up plays to their political advantage as the world pressures Israel more in response to that. And from Israel's perspective, Hamas being in charge of Gaza after the October 7th attacks is intolerable, and they are willing to go through Palestinian civilians in order to try to pursue that goal. And every time these negotiations start getting moving, they always talk about how some issues they're going to, work out the final steps later. And the final steps are always Hamas says, you leave, we be in charge of Gaza. And Israel says, you have to at least quit, or maybe go into exile or something as a minimum condition for it. And then they break down. So the way to get there is one of those two has to budge in some manner or another. Or, I suppose, one in this case would probably be Israel, could unilaterally quit and just say, okay, fine, if we don't get a deal, we'll stop anyway on our own. But that always is the impasse. And currently, the U.S., Egypt, Qatar, and a few others are really trying to push them to get to at least a temporary ceasefire, meaning one that could then allow prisoner and hostage exchanges and perhaps build towards greater negotiations.
Professor Grossman, I thought it was very interesting. President Biden yesterday said that he will not be supplying the weapons to Israel if there's a major Gaza offensive, specifically if Israel invades Rafah. I think this was one of the boldest statements the president has made thus far. Do you agree?
Yes. Boldest statement, boldest statement, and also with an action behind it. So the U.S. has been helping Israel, providing a variety of arms, and this is for multiple tasks. So there were things like air defense missiles to be able to stop Iranian missile launches like the ones that we saw recently. And then there are other types, and the weapons that the U.S. held back from Israel are these 2,000-pound and 500-pound bombs, basically crude ones, make a really big explosion and are not especially smart with targeting. And the fear is that because so many Palestinian civilians fleeing other parts of the fighting have packed into this one city of Rafah, there's an estimated over 1 million people that are there in a city that had 200,000 or fewer before the war. And so they are all packed in there. And the fear is that if Israel goes in hard, which Israel wants to do because this is the last bastion of Hamas power in Gaza, that if they go in hard, they will end up killing a lot of civilians in the process. And so the U.S. stance has been, you can't do this unless you have a good plan for getting a lot of the civilians out of harm's way, and Israel doesn't really. And so the U.S., as sort of a shot across the bow, said, okay, fine, we're not sending these weapons, and you need to not go into Rafah and do this operation. And so this is currently the impasse, and for at least the time being, Israel's sort of holding back, but they're also sort of doing some of the operation in that they took over the border crossing between Rafah and Egypt, saying that that was a way to stop potential Hamas smuggling under the tunnels and to fire back for what was a Hamas rocket attack in the area. If they, by doing that, that starts moving the operation in a direction towards starting, and also cut off potential aid avenues. And so aid trucks couldn't get through. And that was what caused the U.S. to act. Mm-hmm. And it's this uneasy moment where it's not clear what Israel's going to do and whether they attack or not. And if they don't attack, if there can actually be a brokered agreement with Israel and Hamas still disagreeing on this fundamental issue.
Every morning on the other side of the world, Israelis wake up wondering, is it going to get worse? Right. Is there going to be another attack? Is there going to be our version of 9/11, 10/7? And more directly, just because of the reality of the day, every morning on the other side of the world, innocent children wake up in Rafah without anything to eat and are starving. I mean, and it may sound crass, but does this come down to who's willing to kill less innocent people?
It does sound crass, but, war is, and so it's appropriate. But part of the answer is I'd say no, because both Hamas and Israel seem to be okay with killing innocent people or with innocent people dying if it means to achieve their larger war or political aims. And so the ones that have been concerned about civilian casualties the most have been outside actors, have been other countries that are pressuring them, and this includes the United States, and taking concern over it, international institutions like the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice. Those are the ones that have been concerned about civilian casualties. One of the things that makes this war so brutal and so tragic is that the people actually fighting it are not taking care to avoid civilian casualties. Hamas has been deliberately hiding in civilian areas, putting civilians in harm's way, knowing that if Israel then attacks them and kills civilians in the process, Israel gets the blame, not them. And Israel has been operating with a loose rules of engagement that show very low prioritization of trying to avoid civilian casualties, lower than, for example, the U.S. had when fighting in Iraq or Afghanistan. And as a result, way more civilians have died. And now, as you noted, there are serious famine conditions in which people who manage to survive the fighting literally do not have enough to eat. And more of them will die as a result
that's
if
awful.
they can't get a bunch of aid in soon.
Professor Grossman, before we let you go, I wanted to ask you, you've written extensively about drones being used during warfare. Interesting story that I read yesterday, nearly half of the drones that Israel shot down were its own. I wanted to know if that was surprising to you and if that's going to be an issue for other militaries.
Shot down, you mean at which point?
Friendly fire. Their own shooting down their own drones. 40% of the drones down by Israel are a result of what they're calling friendly fire.
I have to look into that. I don't have an answer.
So you haven't seen it as a trend of bad engineering and things where it becomes a factor?
Well, one of the factors about drones in general is that anybody can operate them. And besides the highest level military ones, they're pretty cheap and not that fancy. And so people can either get them on the commercial market. You can see a lot of China-made ones that are being used in Ukraine, for example, and Israeli companies sell ones publicly. So it would not be surprising to me that somebody who is, say, either works with Hamas or supporter of them would try to buy some of these and get them then to Israel's enemies to be able to use against them. But at least that part checks out, yeah.
Drones and terrorism, asymmetric warfare amongst the works of Professor Nicholas Grossman. Happy graduation, and thanks for the reality check again. We will be in touch.
Yep, thank you. And
Thanks,
congrats
Professor.
to all the students who are graduating.
There you go.
Absolutely.
Thank you.